When you have both autism and ADHD, what clinicians call AuDHD, your sense of identity can shift dramatically from day to day. Your interests, energy levels, and even your internal voice might feel fundamentally different than they did yesterday. This isn't a personal failing or emotional immaturity. It's what happens when two distinct neurological patterns attempt to coexist in the same brain, each with its own approach to building a coherent sense of self. Erik Erikson's foundational work on identity development describes how most people construct what he called identity achievement, a stable sense of who they are based on explored and committed values, interests, and roles. James Marsh's later research expanded this into identity status theory, showing how typical identity formation involves periods of exploration followed by commitment to particular aspects of self. This process typically creates continuity over time. The person who loved jazz at 20 recognizes themselves in the person who loves jazz at 40, even if they've expanded their musical tastes. There's a through line connecting past and present selves. For AuDHD individuals, identity often feels more fragmented. One day you're passionate about marine biology, the next you can't remember why you ever cared about fish. You feel authentic with close friends, but like a fraud at work. People describe feeling like they're wearing masks so consistently that they've lost track of who they actually are underneath. The tempting explanation is that AuDHD people are simply more complex or multifaceted than others. But complexity isn't the core issue. The issue is that autism and ADHD involve fundamentally different approaches to identity formation that often work at cross purposes. Autism research consistently shows strong preferences for consistency and predictability. Tony Atwood's clinical work documents how autistic individuals often develop intense, sustained interests that become central scaffolding for identity formation. These aren't casual hobbies. They inform daily routines, social connections, and life choices, sometimes for decades. ADHD research reveals a different pattern. Russell Barkley's longitudinal studies describe what he terms temporal myopia, difficulty maintaining consistent focus and motivation over extended periods. What captures intense attention today might lose all appeal tomorrow, not from fickleness, but because ADHD brains seek novelty and stimulation as core features of their functioning. When these two systems attempt to build identity together, the result resembles trying to construct a building while the foundation keeps shifting. The autistic aspects want to establish consistent preferences and maintain them. The ADHD aspects want to explore new versions of yourself regularly. Neither approach is wrong, but they often contradict each other directly. Psychologists study identity integration, how different aspects of yourself coalesce into a coherent whole. In typical development, various elements like values, interests, social roles, and personal history learn to work together with reasonable consistency. There might be variations over time, but there's underlying coherence. In AuDHD brains, you're essentially managing two different systems with conflicting optimization strategies. Atwood and Garnett's 2016 clinical research on autism documents how special interests create identity scaffolding that extends far beyond casual engagement. These intense fascinations inform self-concept at multiple levels, from daily structure to career choices to social identity. The neurological drive toward consistency means these interests often persist for years or decades. But ADHD operates differently. Barkley's 2015 study of 367 adults with ADHD found characteristic patterns of shifting attention and motivation that he linked to executive function differences. The ADHD brain seeks stimulation and novelty as fundamental features, not character flaws. What provides intense engagement today might genuinely lose appeal tomorrow as the brain seeks new sources of activation. When these systems try to build identity together, they create competing narratives. Your autistic traits might establish, I am someone who loves marine biology, as core identity, building expertise and routine around that interest. But your ADHD traits might shift focus to astronomy next month, leaving the marine biology identity feeling false and abandoned. This creates what researchers call fragmented self-concept. Campbell and colleagues' 1996 study of 132 adults with ADHD found significantly lower scores on measures of self-concept clarity compared to neurotypical controls. Participants struggled with questions like, I have a clear sense of who I am and what I am, not because they lacked self-awareness, but because their self-concept genuinely shifted over time. AuDHD individuals face additional complexity that pure autism or ADHD research doesn't capture. Cognitive scientists describe switching costs, the mental energy required to shift between different processing modes. In AuDHD brains, you might switch between autism optimized functioning, seeking deep focus, routine, predictability, and ADHD optimized functioning, craving novelty, stimulation, change, multiple times per day. Each switch requires recalibrating not just what you're doing, but who you feel like you are in that moment. You might spend Monday deeply researching 18th century literature, feeling you found your calling, then wake Tuesday completely uninterested in books and passionate about rock climbing instead. Masking compounds this complexity. Both autistic and ADHD individuals learn to hide traits considered socially unacceptable, but AuDHD individuals often mask contradictory things simultaneously. You might hide your autistic need for routine while also concealing ADHD impulsivity, presenting a version that's neither too rigid nor too chaotic. Cage and Troxell Whitman's 2019 study of 502 autistic adults found direct links between chronic masking and reduced authenticity scores on standardized measures. When you spend significant energy managing others' perceptions, you lose touch with your own experience. The mask becomes so sophisticated that you forget what lies beneath it. The research picture becomes more complex when examining how ADHD identity issues manifest across different contexts and life stages. We should note that much of this research is still emerging, with smaller sample sizes than we'd prefer for definitive conclusions. What clinical observations do suggest is highly context-dependent identity presentation. The same person might appear confidently autistic in one setting, confidently ADHD in another, and completely masked in a third, all within the same week. This creates what some researchers are beginning to study as situational identity fragmentation. It's not just that interests change over time. Different environments seem to activate entirely different versions of yourself. You might be detail-oriented and systematic at work, spontaneous and creative at home, and anxiously people-pleasing at family gatherings. Each version feels genuine in the moment, but they don't integrate into a coherent whole. The clinical picture varies dramatically based on which traits dominate at different times. Some AuDHD individuals report periods where autistic traits are more prominent, feeling more consistent and focused, but also more rigid and socially isolated. Other periods show ADHD dominance, more flexibility and social engagement, but also more scattered attention and emotional volatility. Trauma history appears to significantly influence how these identity issues manifest. Raymaker and colleagues' 2017 study of 209 autistic adults found that those with co-occurring ADHD traits showed higher rates of identity confusion, particularly among those reporting developmental trauma. AuDHD individuals who experienced childhood invalidation of their natural traits often develop what psychologists call introjected identity, internalizing external expectations so deeply that they lose track of their own preferences. Gender socialization also affects presentation patterns. Research suggests that people socialized as female often develop more sophisticated masking strategies, but experience more severe identity diffusion as a result. They become such effective social chameleons that they genuinely can't access their unmasked preferences. We need more rigorous longitudinal studies to understand whether AuDHD identity issues represent temporary adjustment challenges or persistent features of this neurotype combination. The replication crisis in psychology reminds us to interpret these findings cautiously, particularly given the small sample sizes in much AuDHD research. What we can say is that some individuals report recognizable patterns, what might be called identity cycling, ACYAM, where they shift predictably between more autism presenting and more ADHD presenting periods. These cycles might correlate with stress, seasonal changes, or life transitions. Some people learn to work with these patterns, while others find them disorienting. Neurobiologically, we don't yet have definitive answers about what's happening in AuDHD brains during identity formation. The research simply isn't there yet to make strong claims about neural mechanisms. If you recognize yourself in this description, the first principle is that identity instability in AuDHD isn't a malfunction. It's your brain attempting to integrate two different ways of being in the world. This integration requires time and conscious effort. Rather than pursuing a single, stable identity, you might need to develop what psychologists call identity flexibility, the ability to recognize and work with different aspects of yourself as they emerge. This doesn't indicate inconsistency or deception. It reflects complexity that most identity models don't accommodate. One useful approach involves what some therapists describe as identity archaeology. deliberately excavating authentic preferences from beneath layers of masking and adaptation. This means paying attention to what you gravitate toward when alone and unstressed. What do you do when no one is watching and you don't need to perform? Those unguarded moments often contain information about your core self. This process requires accepting what might feel like contradictions. You might genuinely need both routine and novelty, both deep focus and variety, both social connection and solitude. These aren't contradictions, they're natural results of integrating two different neurotypes that each contribute valuable perspectives. The masking component requires particular attention. Many AuDHD individuals have masked for so long that they've lost connection to what feels authentic versus what feels safe. Learning to unmask gradually, in low stakes environments with trusted people, can help reconnect with hidden aspects of yourself. This process often involves grief. You might need to mourn versions of yourself that were never allowed to develop, or the energy spent trying to be someone you're not. That grief is valid and necessary for building authentic identity. Practically, this might mean developing what researchers call identity anchors, core values or principles that remain consistent even as interests and energy levels shift. These anchors aren't about what you do or what interests you. They're about how you want to treat people, what environments help you thrive, and what kinds of challenges energize versus drain you. Your identity isn't broken because it doesn't fit typical templates of stable selfhood. You're not a failed neurotypical person. You're an AuDHD person, learning to integrate two different ways of experiencing the world. The instability you feel isn't a character flaw. It's the natural process of a complex system learning to work with itself rather than against itself. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" consider asking, "How am I?" The answer changes, and that's exactly as it should be. Your identity isn't a destination you reach. It's an ongoing conversation you have with yourself. And AuDHD brains simply have more voices in that conversation than most.